Hi, this is Mike, aka Designs by M. Thanks for joining me today as I go through how I created these beautiful cards. Without further ado, let's get started. So normally I start off my videos showing you all the supplies that I'm going to use. Well, this time I really didn't have a concrete idea on the card I was going to make. In fact, I ended up making 2 cards and my supplies kept changing as I went along. I did know that I wanted to use the Leaves and Fern set as well as the Rose stamp sets from Anthony's Papercraft. So as I go along, I'm going to go ahead and call those out in the video, and then as always I will have links to all the supplies used in the description box below. Alright, so the first thing that we did was I used some 80-pound cardstock and kind of just cut out this wavy type pattern, and then I used a 3x4 piece of Strathmore marker paper, and that's what I'm inking on, and then I just used that wavy pattern shape to kind of create some ripples or some random waves on this paper using the Distress ink in Broken China. Alright, and so now for my other piece, I again am using the Strathmore marker paper in a 3x4 inch piece of paper there. And for this technique, I am using 2 Distress inks as in the Oxides as well as a regular Distress ink. So for the Distress Oxides, I'm using Worn Lipstick in Broken China, and then for the regular Distress ink, I'm using the small cube of Squeezed Lemonade. Now I'm just using some sponges that I had laying around because I originally was going to use the blending tool, but I wanted the little spots there that I'm creating to be a little bit smaller than what those blending tools would have given me. So I think anything that you have that you can apply color to in a small random patterns would be perfect. Almost a Q-tip would have even been good for this process. Alright, so one more time, let's ink up another 3x4 piece of cardstock. So this time I am only using the Distress Oxide in Squeezed Lemonade, and I'm going to go ahead and apply that to this entire panel here. Again, most of my video is sped up because I want to give you the overall process so that you learn it and you understand it, but I don't want you to have to sit there and watch me color for 20 minutes. I think this panel alone took me over 5 minutes to apply the color onto it, so I do speed my videos up quite a bit, just so that you don't have to sit through the entire thing. I think the entire card process took me over an hour, and that would just be way too long for a video. But if you do have any suggestions, or you want the videos slowed down just a little bit, please leave me a comment in the description box below, and I'll see what I can do. Alright, and now that I have all my panels done, I'm going to go ahead and start the stamping process. So the first technique that I'm going to do is the Emboss Resist technique. So I have my stamping positioning tool here with my cardstock, and I lined up my stamps, and so I'm using the stamps, the Leaf and Fern set from Anthony's Papercraft. I did use my powder tool to make sure that everything was dried and that I would not get any static, and that is important in this technique because you only want the Versamark to stick to where you stamped. So I went ahead and I stamped my image, and then I went ahead and moved it a couple times to make sure that those leaves and ferns were all over this panel. And then I went ahead and I poured my clear embossing powder over the entire panel. So you really can't see anything at this point, but once I go ahead and heat emboss that, it's going to get really shiny. I tried to hold it up for the camera, but I'm not sure if you guys are going to actually be able to see that or not. But clear embossing powder, when you stamped it, it turns like this really glossy, almost wet type of look. But it's not wet, it just looks really neat. And so I'm using my heat tool here, and I am heating all that embossing powder, and here I'm trying to hold it up to the camera just so you can see how glossy that looks. So now comes the fun part. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Broken China and my Distress Oxide, and now I'm going to cover that entire panel. And so what happens is the Broken China is going to cover the entire panel except for where I embossed the images. So for the leaves that I stamped and I embossed, those are going to remain the color beneath. So the pinks, the yellows, and the blues that I did in that random trio pattern will show through from the bottom. Now this is just a really neat technique. Alright, now for the yellow cardstock, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, except I'm going to use the rose stamp set from Anthony's Papercraft. I'm going to go ahead and align that up onto my paper to make sure it's pretty much centered. I'm going to use my powder tool to make sure there's no static and that entire panel is completely dry. Stamp it with Versamark, heat emboss it with the clear embossing powder, and then I'm going to use the Distress ink in Seedless Preserves to do the emboss resist technique on this panel. And last but not least, for the panel that started it all, I'm going to go ahead and use the rose stamp set, and I am going to stamp that onto that panel using the Distress Oxides in Worn Lipstick. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that aside to dry completely. Alright, so now it's time to assemble this card, and so I went ahead and I found some blue-green cardstock that I had in my collection, and I cut it to a 1/4 inch bigger than the panel, so that would be 3 1/4 by 4 1/4, and then I mounted that onto the other panel that we created earlier. Earlier I think I said that panel was also 3 by 4, but in reality that panel is actually 5 1/4 by 4 1/8, and then that will all get attached onto the top folding white 5 1/2 by 4 1/4 card base. Alright, so now let's go ahead and assemble our last card. So for this card I did cut several mats. So for the maroon colored mats, those were cut to 4 1/4 by 3 1/4, as well as 4 by 5 1/4. For the black mat, that was cut to 3 3/4 by 5. All of those will get adhered to a top folding black card base that is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And so for some of the panels I used tape, and for some I used foam squares to give the project extra dimension. So the last thing to do to finish these cards is to add some embellishments. Of course I'm going to use, wait for it, sequins! For this card I'm using metallic sequins that are black and gold, and for the other card the sequins are iridescent. I'm using Ranger Multimedia Matte to adhere the sequins to each of the cards, and then to finish them off after the sequins I'm going to go ahead and use glossy accents. I wanted to give it a similar feel of dewdrops on morning roses, and I really think this gives it a nice little finish to these cards. And now my cards are complete. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. If you do make any of these cards or cards similar to this using this technique, please use the hashtag DesignsByM so that I can go ahead and check it out and see what you guys have made. Thanks again everybody, and have a great day.